radio for the masses.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army.
If the game is rigged, change the game. Game changer.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
This is Fade to Black with your host, Jimmy Church, on the Game Changer Radio Network.
All right. Good evening. How you doing? It's Fade to Black. Today is Monday, January 5th, 2026. That's right. We made it. Let's do this, man. This week on Fade to Black, we've got a short week this week. Tonight, Christopher Naughton is with us. We're going to be talking about Edgar Cayce, but Tuesday night off air, Wednesday night we're off air, Thursday night we're off air because I have to wing it out of town to do some TV production. It's just the life I chose, right? So there you go. Next week, a full slate of shows, but the next week after that, I'm back out of town to do some more TV production, and I've got to do it. I love doing it. I love doing this more. I do. I love hanging out with all of you, but I've got to get stuff done, and it's going to be like this for the rest of the year. Okay. It's just the way that it is. You sign that contract, you commit to it, and it's just the way it is. And I want to be clear to everybody. For the last 3 years shooting all the TV stuff, I shot on Fridays. So I would travel on Thursday, shoot on Friday, back on Saturday because of Fade to Black. So I was able to, still do 3 shows of Fade to Black. The production schedule with the TV network has just forced it this way. And I said, yes, you've got to be a team player. And yeah, so it's just the way that it is. But and with all the other travel and stuff, it's going to be a crazy year, but I'm not apologizing. You're going to get me on TV. If I'm not here, you're going to get the TV shows. All right. So if you need your Jimmy fix, there are plenty of ways out there to go and get it done. I do want to mention really quick, my next event coming up is the Conscious Life Expo, and it's February 20th through the 23rd, 2026 at the LAX Hilton. The links for that are below. Okay. Full schedule, events, and everything else. This is the biggest conference in the world like this, 25,000 attendees. And yes, I've been hosting it for over 10 years. And it's a lot of fun. It really is. So if you're a part of the community, you've heard about it and you've always wanted to go. If you've been before, what's up, right? You're coming back. But the Conscious Life Expo, February at the LAX Hilton, come and hang out with us. All right. One last thing I want to mention before I bring in Christopher is crazy weekend for the world, right? Here we are. It's New Year's, all of that stuff going on. And then the United States decides to go and invade a country and grab their president, Maduro. And now it's just geopolitics. It's just, and although it was a strange weekend to watch this go on and Maduro appearing in court today, I get all of that. I truly do. But it's what humanity has always done. We cannot get out of our own way. We can't. We want peace. We want love. We want peace on earth. We talk these things and we constantly do the opposite. It is it's a very strange thing, and my resolve into all of this, how I just kind of get through it mentally, because I don't want to see anything like that go down. I want everybody to just be good, but the world isn't like that. That's not what it's about. But I hope that one day here, where we have peace negotiations going on in Gaza, and we've got Ukraine, and we've got Yemen, and it's different hot Taiwan. We've got all these things going on around the world, and then we talk about bringing peace and being the negotiators and doing all of this, and then we turn around and do it ourselves, and saber rattling at other countries. It's just, the whole thing is crazy. So I don't do politics on this show. I don't do religion on this show. I do the conspiracy of politics and the conspiracy of religion, but that doesn't mean that I'm immune to everything I observe, and it really affected me. It really affected me this weekend. So with that, let's have fun tonight. One of the things that I enjoy about this show and guests like Christopher is that I, along with you, for 2 or 3 hours a night, we get to disengage from everything and get our knowledge on with other stuff. And it's a totally fun thing for me to do. And it allows me to clear my head, where I can sit here for 2 or 3 hours, 4 nights a week, with no internet, no scrolling, no nothing, just old school conversation. Right? And that's why you're here. So let's do that tonight. Yeah, I'm going to leave that right there. I can keep rambling. I'm telling you, I was really affected by this weekend. Tonight, it's Edgar Cayce. That's right. Christopher Naughton is here. We're going to be talking about Edgar Cayce's revelations, all of that. So much of it. When you think about, of course, Atlantis, but you've got the Sphinx and going into a dream state, coming out of it and writing this stuff down, book after book, volume after volume. It's all absolutely incredible. But tonight, we're going to get into some UFOs. We're going to do some high strangeness, of course, consciousness. And as we walk, as I just mentioned, hopefully to maturity and evolution. He is the current CEO of Edgar Cayce's Association for Research and Enlightenment. That's A.R.E., where he hosts Conscious Universe, a program investigating all areas of consciousness and high strangeness. That's right, UFOs, UAPs, and everything else. Now, he is a former New Jersey prosecutor, civil litigation attorney, and the 6-time Emmy Award-winning host and producer of the American public television program, The American Law Journal. I would like to welcome for the first time to Fade to Black, Christopher Naughton. He's right there. Christopher, good evening, young man.
Hey, Jimmy. Nice to, of course, I've met you, quote unquote, before, seeing your work before. So it's great to be here. Finally get here.
Absolutely. And you, let me do this first so we can get started. You get the first time guest disclaimer, which is this, right? So we can move on. Chris, it's just you and I sitting on my couch having a conversation as friends. And where the conversation starts, it starts. Where it ends, it ends. But we're going to end as friends. Now, you have to accept so we can move on.
I hereby accept.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I have in my phone, I have a list of friends who are criminal defense attorneys. I'm adding you to that list. One day you're going to get that phone call, dude.
Don't forget, I served as a prosecutor. I was on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, that's where I need the advice. I need it from you. Gotcha. Yeah.
Well, the best criminal defense attorneys are former prosecutors, so we'll leave it at that. Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
I'm going to circle back to that. There's lots of reasons to do that and to get your insight into today's events and UFOs and the Pentagon and Washington and Congress and the Senate and everything else, how the law is observing this. So
absolutely,
we'll circle back to that. I do want to start off the show with this though. And when I've told this story many times live, maybe you've heard it before, but I'm going to say it now that you're on the show. When I was very young, when I first started to read, and I suppose, I'm like 6, like right in there, 6, 7, and I can read now. And I go in to our living room and I look at my mom's bookshelf, right? bookshelf, bottom row Encyclopedia Britannica, right? We all had that at home, right? Remember those? But above it, and I'm looking, and it's shelf after shelf of Edgar Cayce books, right? Hundreds. And I'm like, what is that? I didn't know if it was a man or what, but I could see that it was all right, all the same. How incredible is that? And my mom, I never spoke to her about Edgar Cayce. She's no longer here. I wish I would have, but it was important to her for sure. But the other part is that's who she was, and that was my family life. So I don't think it's an accident that you and I are on this show tonight talking about Edgar Cayce and UFOs.
You wouldn't be here, Jimmy, if it wasn't for Edgar Cayce in your own way. I mean, the fact is, whether you want to say it's seeped into your subconscious, osmosis, what have you, direct implication, you were in that environment. You know, I had a chance to speak to Dan Aykroyd a few months ago. He joined us for quickly for a conference. And, you know, I spoke with Dan because years ago, I saw him at a National Association of Broadcaster convention, and he was pushing a program called Strange Universe. And I introduced myself. I said, Mr. Aykroyd, have you ever heard of Edgar Cayce? And he said, heard of Edgar Cayce? I come from a family that was all into spiritualism and into metaphysics and into channeling. So, I mean, you weren't the only one, but he said there used to be books around the farmhouse about Edgar Cayce. And in some ways, Edgar Cayce is indeed the gold standard when it comes to psychic phenomena, when it comes to remote viewing, when it comes to foreseeing or foreshadowing or being prophetic in a new age, new thought medium. Some people sometimes think that A.R.E., the Association for Research and Enlightenment, and Edgar Cayce are in the past. We are very much in the present, and as a matter of fact, on the cutting edge of consciousness studies and engagement. So that's why I'm here tonight. But Jimmy, you're here tonight in a way because of Edgar Cayce.
I'm also here because of King Crimson, but that's a whole nother story. It's a whole nother story.
That was our conversation before we came on. You know, Jimmy and I were just talking about our favorite music from the last century. But yeah, if you ever flip that switch, you want to talk about prog or metal, I'm with you.
Yeah. I'm just good for transparency for the audience. I'm wearing a Steve Vai shirt tonight, and we're doing the sound check. And so here's Chris, CEO Chris, right? Hey, dude, I love Steve Vai. I was like, man, you do not, you know. But here's my point with that. And we just had a wonderful conversation about music and bands and musicianship and stuff, and your knowledge of that goes deep. But here's the point with that: as we get into Edgar Cayce, there is something, I want your opinion on this. There is something going on with creative consciousness, those minds, whether it's an artist, a sculptor, a poet, a musician, a writer, screenwriter, what have you, that have a lot of paranormal experiences happen to them. And I don't know if it's across the population, but certainly artists have the ability to open their minds to this stuff. Have you noticed that too?
Well, the way I look at it, Jimmy, is that, you know, people who are artists and pursue their art are pursuing it really for one reason. Even those like Springsteen or Taylor Swift that have gotten immensely successful, it was their passion. Passion is our ultimate state of reality. Passion is in the very core of our soul. Even as we talk about the term psychic, it means of the soul. So when you're pursuing your passion, you're pursuing your soul's calling. So should we be so surprised that people who are pursuing the very deepest part of their selves, which goes way beyond this physical lifetime, might also be tapping into other interdimensional phenomena? You know, Cayce said that our souls were essentially interdimensional and interplanetary. So again, this is why, you know, you're talking to a former prosecutor and television host on a program on the law who absolutely ate up so much of what Edgar Cayce imparted to this world, because it really does truly strike a chord within the deepest part of ourselves.
The reason why what you just said to me is so important is with Edgar Cayce, there is a perception from the outside of him being a one-dimensional thing, the sleeping prophet that was predicting the future like Nostradamus, right? Okay. Partially true. Yeah, okay, I get that. But that's not what Edgar was about. He was way ahead of the curve. When you consider what the subjects that we talk about today, interdimensionality, extra dimensions, parallel worlds, accessing other reality, these were things that he was talking about nearly 100 years ago. And you stop, right? And exposing people to the idea that the assumption that there is another thing out there that is around us that isn't a part of our 2 and 3D existence. That's what Edgar Cayce was all about. And when you start to look into him and understand the complexity of how he was presenting these things, that's one thing. And then you look at today where suddenly science is talking about consciousness being non-local and consciousness being first. These were concepts that were discussed, 70, 80 years ago and were largely poo-pooed by the scientific community. But it turns out Edgar was spot on the money.
As Edgar was spot on the money, and so were some of the early quantum physicists who scientific materialism hasn't wanted to listen to for 100 years. But when Erwin Schrödinger said there's only one consciousness in the universe, there's one undifferentiated consciousness, this is again what Edgar Cayce was speaking about, yes, over 100 years ago. Now, just to give you some context here, imagine you're growing up in the Deep South in Kentucky, 8, 9, 10 years after the end of the Civil War. Okay. Your grandparents, they're not antebellum, don't have a big plantation, but they're slave owners. The religion of the time was deep, deep Christian fundamentalism. This was the environment that Edgar Cayce was raised in. And I often say, and I've written a book called America's Next Great Awakening, because I think two of the things that Edgar Cayce transcended are two things that we as Americans are still dealing with today and are moving past. One is racism. The other one is religious fundamentalism. And I know you don't like to talk about politics and religion, and neither do I, but I will talk about consciousness, and I will talk about this man who was raised in this kind of narrow-minded portion of our, not a portion of our country, but a narrow-minded society and culture that he was raised in. And by the time he passed away in 1945, he had transcended both of those limits. Cayce went way beyond race. He gave readings for people of every color, stripe, and also every type of religion. So this is a great story. And of course, with Cayce, we look at the fact that he was introducing us to ideas. He unveiled mysteries to the Western mind that heretofore we had not been exposed to. I mean, think about, 200 years ago, most Americans, no Americans really knew very much about Buddhism or Hinduism or any of the Eastern philosophies. It's only when the transcendentalists start bringing this to the country in the mid 1800s that we even have a toehold on this stuff. Edgar Cayce, although he was a Christian and was a Christian mystic, talked about the viability of any and all religions. So yes, you talk about him being way, way, way ahead of his time. He was so far ahead of his time that many of the things that happened to him in his waking state life, he did not want, and his family did not want others to know about, because it was too odd. It was too way out on the limb. This is a man who talked about reincarnation, and here he was a Christian, and even that set him off. So yes, I could go in any direction here, Jimmy, but Edgar Cayce was so far ahead of his time, and today we are reaping the benefits and the fruits of that great wisdom.
Have you ever read the book Last and First Men?
No, I can't say I have.
Okay. I'll leave that for another time. That's something else for you to go and do tonight after the show, right? Last and First Men. There's a great film about There's a good film about it too as well.
Well, maybe I'll do what Edgar did. He took a book and because he was doing very poorly in his schoolwork, and he actually put a book under his pillow, and literally by osmosis, this man learned everything in the book to the point where he actually got up at school 2 days later and from memory read 45 pages from a book from memory. That's documented. Yeah, I know you're looking at me like,
look, I have an open mind, but wow. Well, okay, so the reason why I bring up Last and First Men, and then I'm going to come back to what you just said.
Yeah.
Last and First Men was also written when the world was being tipped upside down between World War I and World War II.
Yep.
And I don't know how people dealt with the drama, right? I mean, it seems like every day you almost have a heart attack, right? What crazy. So anyway, this book was written then too as well, and influenced by, it's a science fiction book, by the way, very crazy. I'm not going to get into it, but Cayce was also, just like you just mentioned, was influenced by this. And so when you look at historically their work today and how relevant it was to where we are today, but it was written so long ago that we need to. I don't have any problems as a quasi historian to go back and see what these giants were writing about, and that includes Schrodinger, right, and Niels Bohr and others, Einstein and Oppenheimer and
Wigner and Bohm, yes,
John Wheeler, right?
Yeah.
How they envisioned the future through very traumatic times that they were in, dealing with very sensitive subjects. So yeah, Last and First Men and Edgar Cayce, how it looked at the future being influenced by their current, they were very concerned about the world. And
absolutely. Of course they were. But, again, Cayce, in some ways, I mean, at least in America, stood on some shoulders. In other words, an Edgar Cayce doesn't come into play unless you have the transcendentalists like Thoreau and Emerson and others come through first that start talking about, you're much more like Jesus than you think, meaning you are Jesus in utero, or William James, who was the first dean of Harvard Medical School and wrote the Varieties of Religious Experience, and was also the first president of the American Society of Psychical Research. Here he was, a preeminent psychologist. He also started, American Society of Psychical Research. So an Edgar Cayce comes through really right as William James dies, right around 1910 or so. Edgar Cayce, this poor guy from Kentucky, makes it to the front page of the New York Times. And the New York Times says, illiterate man, he was not illiterate, illiterate man becomes doctor when he sleeps. So Cayce had already started to make a name for himself as being a master healer. And, and again, most of you probably know the main story about Cayce, but in a word or two, and I could go as deeply as you'd like me to go, Jimmy, but essentially here is a person who at a very young age had spiritual, unexplained experiences. For example, seeing the dead. His grandfather dies in front of him, got thrown from a horse. 2 days later, he's out in the barn. He's talking to grandpa. He tells mom and dad he's talking to grandpa. Well, it's just the wild imaginings of a 6-year-old until he starts telling them stories that only the grandfather knew. Freaked them out. The aunt said nothing good is, who was a fundamentalist, said nothing good is going to come of this child. So at an early age, he was exhibiting psychic talents. He saw what he called the little people. He saw basically into other dimensions. And one day, according to the story that Cayce tells himself, he is visited by an angel. And basically he tells the angel he wants to serve humankind. That's what he wants to do. And the angel tells him, I know this sounds like, a Joseph Smith story or something out of the Old Testament. I completely get it. But let's say for a moment, if we can just suspend three-dimensional belief for just a moment, if Cayce was perceiving what was happening in other dimensions where our souls are interdimensional, maybe there were beings that were communicating with him. So at a young age, and then as a late teen, early 20s, he loses his voice. Again, long story short, he basically is hypnotized. And when he is hypnotized, his voice comes back. He comes out of hypnosis. He can't speak. So he goes through this process. And then eventually, when he is put under one time, he starts giving medical relief suggestions to himself. And he is cured. And his voice comes back. And this is the beginning of a young man who's now on the trajectory to becoming America's most documented psychic, which is exactly what Edgar Cayce is. 14,000 readings plus came through this man. 9,000 of those readings were simply to help his fellow man heal. And the interesting thing is that for that first portion of his life, he's basically a medical healer. But once he moves from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, to Selma, Alabama, to Dayton, Ohio. And in Dayton, he gets a reading. You must move to Virginia Beach. There's something about Virginia Beach. There's something about the psychic energy here, a vortex of sorts. He is told to move here, to be by the ocean. And they didn't use these terms, but basically your psychic talents will now be on steroids. And that's exactly what happened. So he comes to Virginia Beach. And though he had done a few readings on reincarnation and Egypt or Atlantis, now he comes to Virginia Beach, and this stuff is now just pouring through him, coming through him. Not only prophecies, but also past lives. Now, again, you have to put yourself in the shoes of a man raised in a Christian household, and now you're starting to talk about reincarnation. I mean, in many Christian circles today, especially more Orthodox or evangelical circles, reincarnation is anathema. That's an Eastern concept. Don't go near there. Pat Robertson, who was also here in Virginia Beach, interesting, I'll talk about that later too, that they were both here in Virginia Beach, would tell his flock, stay away from this. This is of the devil. Cayce had to adapt to this. And there were a couple of times in his life where the information that flowed through him was even a little bit of a bridge too far for him, and he would put it aside for a while. Even his wife, and he was an excellent photographer, his wife would just say, can't we just have a normal life? Be a photographer, do what you do. But twice in his life, including once with his wife, there were physical illness tragedies, and he had to go back on the couch, lay down, go into an altered state, and through this sleep process, this trance process, would come up with remedies, cured his wife of tuberculosis, which in those days, if you got TB, you went to the sanitarium and then you went to the cemetery. The success rate was somewhere under 10%. His wife did survive that. His son, again, after he puts the readings down for a while, because they're too fantastical even for him, his son gets flash powder, because again, he was a photographer. He gets flash powder in his eyes and he's going to lose the eye. And Edgar goes into an altered state, gets a reading, and they use various poultices. And the doctors said they could not believe it was a miracle that the son was healed. So again, you have to understand that this man, as a Christian, and in those times, to even talk about reincarnation. I mean, we talk about reincarnation today as like almost an afterthought. Yeah, they know about it in the East, and they've done some great studies up at the University of Virginia's DOPS programs. But for most of us to talk about reincarnation, whether people believe in it or not a big deal. Back in 1925, huge deal. In fact, you would almost be seen as an anti-Christian if you believed in such things. But Edgar plowed through, and eventually he came to trust those readings and gave some amazing readings to a lot of amazing people and talked about past lives and how that impacted what we were doing in this lifetime today.
Do you remember the movie, The Reincarnation of Peter Prout?
I do, vaguely, but I do remember it. Yes.
You and I are the same age. And so when we were kids and that movie came out, I heard of reincarnation, right? Kind of. And I watched that and came away changed. I recently watched it again. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize it was that campy. It was pretty serious when I was a kid. But anyway,
yeah.
The
Brian Murphy was another one at that time, I think in the 60s, which a lot of people plugged into. I did not, but it was a book. I don't know if it was ever made into a movie, but that also introduced a whole swath of Americans and actually people around the world to reincarnation.
Now, let's talk about. I want to get into some specifics, and we'll do all the fun stuff tonight, the Sphinx and all that.
Yeah.
So we'll get into all of that.
Sure.
But the idea coming from a Christian like Edgar, and I don't want you or anybody else to take this the wrong way. Just take it any way you can.
We're going to remain friends.
Yeah, we'll still be friends.
Right.
Because when you look at Fatima, which something happened there.
Yep.
But the way that it is all revealed out, it seems like the religious atmosphere of the way those kids were raised and world wars, that were playing out, influenced what was happening. And Chris Bledsoe and what's going on with him. And with Edgar, somebody coming to him in a vision, a woman, normally people would look at that and go, all right, well, that's bullshit. And that's not part of today. We don't look at things in that. Is it possible that this person, this woman, was interdimensional, came in, said what she had to say, and then went back to Superman Bizarro world or wherever she came from, right? And that these beings and this species, whatever you want to label, are around us all the time. It's only briefly that they interact in our world. And would we do the same thing to them in their world? Could there be somebody on the other side, right? Like you, right? And goes, okay, so check this out. Last night, this dude came to me in my sleep. His name was Jimmy Church. And he said, right? You know what I mean? And so now we are the apparition to them.
Why not? Yeah. And there have been a couple of movies about that too. Here's the thing about Edgar's life. The readings and what came through the readings were cutting edge and beyond. But the great author Sidney Kirkpatrick, who a good friend of mine, and who passed away late last year, wrote, I think, the quintessential book. There have been many great books on Edgar Cayce. The three hallmarks, I think, are There's a River, written by Thomas Shigrew in the 1940s, right before Edgar passed, Sleeping Prophet by Jess Stern, early 60s, and in 2000, Sidney Kirkpatrick writes An American Prophet. What I love about American Prophet is that it not only talks about what came through the readings, but all of the esoteric phenomena that swirled around Edgar's life in his waking state life. There's a reason that people sometimes call A.R.E. the spook house on the hill, or at least that's what we were called in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and throughout the 2000s. Now we're seen more as a beacon of consciousness and consciousness awareness. But Edgar would often have interactions with people who had passed on. On Sunday nights, he would listen to the radio back in the early 1940s, and he listened to it with his good friend who just happened to be deceased. And there were times that ghosts would show up. One time there was a rapping on the window of the Cayce home, and Gertrude had heard this enough, said, "It's for you." He goes down, answers the door, and it's a woman who had been the help to them many, many years ago. And so she said, "Mr. Cayce, I've been looking all over for you. I need a reading from you, and I need to talk to Dr. Schofield because I've got something I've got to address." And Edgar basically says, "Well, Miss Harris," I forget her name, "I would certainly give you a reading, but you're no longer alive. And Dr. Schofield is no longer alive." This woman was caught in that netherworld, didn't realize that she had actually passed on. And Edgar basically, told her what the next steps were, and she never returned after that. We sometimes wonder, we sometimes think, well, the ghost stories are just for the people who are just half cocked or not all there and that sort of thing. But you think about a guy like Alan Turing, who, basically broke the German code. He often said, once you believe in telepathy, which he did, ghosts are not far behind. The whole notion that there are other dimensions, and why should we be so surprised? Albert Einstein said many years ago time and space are illusions, albeit stubborn ones. That in and of itself should suggest to us that if, this table that I'm knocking on here, I hit my head against it, it's going to hurt, but somehow I'm to believe that it's not real, or that it is, a flow of energy. It's made up of atoms. And oh, by the way, it depends on how you observe those atoms. And is it a wave or a particle? Now we start getting into a place where we're starting to find that our beingness, our reality now becomes much more malleable, much more fungible, much more elastic. And again, Edgar Cayce was talking about that fluidity of our consciousness well over 100 years ago, long before it became fashionable to talk about the Pleiades or Arcturus.
Right.
Edgar Cayce. I mean, those words have become kind of, I don't want to say, de rigueur in the last 20 years, but let's face it, most people into the UFO, UAP, other dimensions, other civilizations speak. If you go to Contact in the Desert or one of the many places you go to hear Pleiadian talk or Arcturus talk, or to hear Darryl Anka, who channels Bashar, and I know you've interviewed him as well, that these people will talk about these things. Edgar Cayce talked about Pleiades and Arcturus back in the 1920s. Now, did it get, promoted on radio? Did they splash it across newspapers? No, it was one of those readings kind of off to the side, because reincarnation was too far, a bridge too far for them. So are we really going to start getting into the Pleiades and Arcturus and interplanetary sojourns? And oh, by the way, the reading about a woman who had been a Mayan priestess in a previous lifetime who met people from other worlds and other civilizations. Edgar Cayce told us that the people of this earth would eventually meet the people of the universe. Well, I don't know if you want to can hang your hat on that, but you tell me. That sounds like 2 + 2 = 4.
Here, are you cool with A.R.E being mainstream?
I'm cool with A.R.E having a greater impact on the world, because I believe that Edgar Cayce someday should be as well known as Billy Graham,
Right.
Carl Jung, Mary Baker Eddy, and Ralph Waldo Emerson. And the day Edgar Cayce's name is known as much as Pat Robertson's name was known here across town, I will have known that the country and the world have reached a new echelon.
Okay, be careful what you wish for, though.
Well, no, look, yeah, I mean, absolutely. If you're going to be out there talking about it, and it's not about the whole notion of let's get big for the sake of being big. Again,
it's not what I mean. What I mean is this.
Yeah.
What I mean is this. Okay, Mr. Prosecutor, let's go at it. Let's go at it. What
right.
I mean, let me clarify. You just objected, so let me clarify.
Right.
Let me clarify. A.R.E has a set of freedoms to explore because you're not mainstream. And total fighting for stuff, for sure. Yeah, I get all of that, but you have a certain amount of autonomy when you're running under the radar. And so if you go fully mainstream, then everybody's watching, and now your freedoms aren't quite what they were. That's what I'm referring to.
Well, maybe I'm naive, but my notion is that, and I could be like the fool in the tarot. I could be walking right into a trap, if you will. But I think my charge as the CEO is to share some of the wisdom and wonders that flowed through this man, who is an absolute icon, father of holistic medicine, according to the American Medical Association's journals, father of New Age and New Thought in many ways, according to many people who would say that it is time for this person to be noted for what he was, a simple Christian mystic who wanted to help his fellow man, period. And talked about what our entire lives were about, being of service, you doing this work here, doing your television work as you travel next week, whatever. You are serving humankind. I am serving now. I was a former prosecutor. I'm a former television host of a legal television program. Now I'm serving as the CEO of the Association for Research and Enlightenment. And I know that there are more boundaries and that there are more frontiers. And this is the most exciting time to be alive. Let's face it, it is fraught with peril, no doubt. You mentioned some of it, what's going on politically, the polarization that we're feeling here, climatologically, socially, culturally, politically. But to quote Peter Russell, who wrote a great book called Waking Up at Time, it's when things got stretched that evolution occurred. And Edgar Cayce talks about sometime in our not too distant future, the whole notion of a fifth root race. And that this fifth root race, this new human being, would exhibit all of the fruits of the spirit of what we see in the psychic spectrum: telepathy, clairvoyance, precognition, auras. I could go on and on. These are just some of the things that Edgar Cayce addressed. And much like Jesus had said a few thousand years ago, Cayce parroted. He said, these things that I'm doing, you can do as well. This is not just relegated to me. And so Cayce's life is a great example for that. In fact, just making a quick segue here to the notion about Jesus, because I like to say here at A.R.E, we cover everything from Jesus to aliens. Both of them provide ontological shock to our audiences, because Edgar Cayce, you want to talk about chutzpah? Edgar Cayce in the readings, when he started talking about reincarnation and he was comfortable, by that time he was finally comfortable. Now the readings start talking about the past lives of Jesus. Oh my word. Can you imagine the apostasy of that? Could you imagine? You want to talk about those people who are hanged for less. Edgar Cayce's talking about this man, Jesus, as not the great exception, but the great example. And that all of us are Christ in utero. That's a real heavy lift. But at the same time, by that time, he had trusted in this source and basically said, these are things you can do as well. And he lists some 30 odd lives that Jesus had been in a previous life. So I know the Pat Robertsons of the world and my friends at the Christian Broadcasting Network just across town here in Virginia Beach. Some reason these, the most well-noted psychic in American history and the largest mouthpiece for Christian evangelicalism, for some reason found their way to Virginia Beach. And there is a good reason for both of them finding their way here, because of the vibratory pattern that apparently exists here.
When it comes to religion, and I want to get to the Sphinx will be next.
For sure.
Listen, everybody, we're gonna do all the big hits tonight. We're gonna do all the big hits. But here, when I'm around a Christian fundamentalist, and I've done this many times, and I can be a dick. I've done this many times where they, Jesus and when I'll go, okay, well, wait a minute. Do you believe in Bigfoot? No. Oh, you don't. It's the same belief system as Jesus. It's the same belief system. And what I mean by that is, if you don't have to have the tangible physical stuff in order to be interested or believe in something and pursue it. Period. When you get into quantum physics, that's faith. That is faith. That is religious faith.
Yeah.
There isn't a physicist on this planet that's laid eyes on an electron. Right?
Yeah.
It ain't happened. But it's all based on faith. And so science is rooted in faith and a belief system, just like other things. And that's why I'm okay with having an open mind with just about everything. What did Schrodinger say? Remember?
Well, he said a lot of things.
Quotes.
Yeah.
One of my favorite quotes. You can change matter by observation. Now, what kind of black magic voodoo crap is that?
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Right? But that's science.
Yeah, exactly. Is it a wave? Is it a particle? Schrodinger's cat. I mean, that to me is magic in some ways. Now, of course, they would say there are scientific precepts that are tied into that. But again, when Einstein talks about spooky things at a distance, or again, that time and space are somehow flexible and malleable, now we realize how vital consciousness is. That is really foundational to every single thing that we have, that we do, that we believe in, that we experience. So Cayce used
foundational and fundamental, the two big F's.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So, I mean, with fundamentalists, I mean, look, I think, and again, I write about this in America's Next Great Awakening, that we are in an age, because of the exchange of information, that right now we have major belief systems bumping up against one another: mysticism, atheism, religion, and science, or scientific materialism. But 150 years ago, there was no way to really corral all of them in to have a conversation, because we didn't even know about Eastern thought. We didn't know about quantum physics. We didn't know about anything other than our own religion, living no further than 50 miles from our home, being married to one person and having one job the entire life. That's all changed in the blink of an eye. That's 150 years ago. Today, through the noosphere that Chardin talked about, or the internet, we are able to see all of these belief systems, and as they bump up against one another, what they do is they erode fundamentalism. So I can sit and have a great conversation with an atheist, because I think atheism has aided spirituality by going after orthodoxy, by going after fundamentalism. I think evangelicals in this country helped create this country in some ways, in the American Revolution, having that faith in this nation. The metaphysical communities have been able to branch out beyond orthodoxies to question the fundamentalism of scientific materialism or evangelicalism. So again, it goes back to Edgar Cayce, what a great gift he gave us. And yes, I absolutely want to talk to you about Egypt and talk about the Sphinx and the pyramid, because there are some things that people don't know about the pyramid, about the Great Pyramid. Not only is it prophecy in stone, but Cayce said they were never tombs. He said, first off, they're 10,000 years older than the archaeologists are telling you. That's number one. And number two, these pyramids were great initiation centers, including for Jesus and John the Baptist.
I'll tell you something crazy. When you go to Giza, right, and let's say the Mina House, the Mina House is the closest, maybe you've been there, the closest hotel to the pyramids. So you can sit outside at the restaurant, have breakfast, freaking great right there. Anyway, you look at that sand, right? And you're eating your breakfast, and you can't help but think to yourself, Moses walked on that dirt, right? Jesus, John walked on that dirt right there, right where you're having your breakfast. And that kind of history and everything, it's an overwhelming, but yet very fun thing to experience, because that is where it all went down. Right there.
Well, of course, and that's why maybe the major world religions, converge at that place.
They do.
But again, I think Cayce really, and once he moves to Virginia Beach and everything opens up, and talking about Egypt and its tie into Atlantis, and also the prophecies and what is purportedly under the right front paw of the Sphinx.
Do we take that literally, or is it?
No, I mean, I know Zahi Hawass goes around the country, and he's of course the director of antiquities for Egypt, and former. Oh, is it former now? Okay, yeah. And has been both a friend and also has poo-pooed things that we've talked about here at A.R.E. But I really would recommend people going to the last Venture Inward magazine, not the new one just come out, but the last one, because in that, the great John Van Auken, and Jimmy, hopefully you'll have him on this program at some point in time too. He's been involved with A.R.E. now for 40 plus years, and is, I think, the ultimate expert when it comes to the variety and the breadth and scope of the Edgar Cayce readings. But he will tell you that Zahi Hawass and the directors of antiquities have missed a lot. That really and I think some of the Italian and Japanese teams that have been on the Giza Plateau are using different methods and different angles to see if there's really something underneath that right front paw of the Sphinx. Now, Cayce said that, that's not going to be uncovered until humankind reaches a certain level of consciousness. So no matter how many times people go in there or try to get to it, everything happens because of consciousness, even our politics. And as you were referencing Venezuela earlier, all of this still goes back to the fact that we have one undifferentiated mind on this planet. Again, we've got to wrap our heads around that because you and I are talking to one another. We have different brains. We get that. But there's one undifferentiated consciousness. And as we rise as a collective, this is when some of the fruits of that raising of consciousness starts to show itself. So again, Cayce said, not going to be the Hall of Records will not be exposed or be revealed until humanity has reached a certain critical mass. Doesn't mean all of us have to be Jesus consciousness, but a certain percentage of who we are has to raise to that point. And only then will all of these great miracles be shared with us.
When the Hall of Records just invites the imagination.
It
right?
sure does. Because if it was given to us by Atlanteans, we may, I like what Darryl Anka has said, Darryl Anka quoting Bashar has said, is that someday, not that far off in the future, our entire history will be able to be played before our eyes, whether it's in something created by AI but a true rendition of our true history. Don't you hope that you're alive at that point in time, Jimmy, where you actually be able to sit and watch what actually did happen with Napoleon, between Hitler and Mussolini, what happened when Babe Ruth hit his 60th home run or what have you, or Steve Vai, made that guitar that looks so much like yours. You'll actually be able to go back and see, if you will, a video replay of that, if that is possible. And I think at some point in time, we will reach that, however many years it takes to get there. But I think, these were the things that Cayce was talking about, the Hall of Records, the Akashic Records, which I know you've spoken with several of your guests here recently about that entire virtual library of everything that has ever occurred. And of course, we feel like, well, there's nothing that could be that expansive or that large. And yet those people who have near-death experiences, and again, we have invited and have worked with the people at the University of Virginia's DOPS program, that's the Division of Perceptual Studies. They've done intense, deep, decades-long research into near-death experiences and reincarnation. And some of those stories, if you listen to them, if the hair doesn't go up on the back of your neck, you're not alive. But when you hear from a Bruce Grayson at University of Virginia, how people who have near-death experiences have a life review, they go through their entire life, event by event by event, and their recollection is they not only feel the emotions that they felt at that moment, but they also get to feel the emotions that other person that they were interacting with, good or bad, they get to feel the feelings of that person. In essence, there is that one consciousness, that one collective consciousness. And so you think about the billions of things we experience in one lifetime. Apparently those numbers don't make the universe lose their stuff. In other words, so many things have happened, but they are categorized and they are cataloged in one way, shape, or form.
It's like the internet; it never goes away. This is the guitar that Christopher's talking about, and just an opportunity for me to put that on screen.
There you go. And Steve Vai didn't exactly copy it, but he intuited it.
He Edgar Cayce that thing.
Yeah. Let
me ask you this.
Yeah.
Because the Hall of Records and the Sphinx paw is one thing, and it's incredible, especially what we know about the Sphinx today and what's going on. Mm-hmm. But when the question of Atlantis comes up, and the influence of Atlantis on Egypt, what Edgar didn't know, what the rest of the world did not know at that time, was the ancient Egyptian builder's text. And when you look at that builder's text, it clearly states that 10,000 years. Now, this is not this is not right. This is not interpreted. No, this is literally what it says. That the ancients showed up in Egypt 10,000 years prior. Now this was written 3,000 years ago, so it was 10,000 years before that. When their land sank into the ocean, and they showed up at Egypt and started Egypt, right? And brought their knowledge with them.
Right.
Now, you can look at that and go, well, what are they referring? What have you do you take this? Is it just a story? Is it well, whatever. But Edgar Cayce didn't know about that, right? He didn't know about that. This is a modern discovery. And it seems to line up perfectly. Should we put a lot of weight into that? Or are the two stories different, or are they talking about the same thing? And they were the survivors of Atlantis and showed up in at the mouth of the Nile River.
Remain curious and continue to pursue it scientifically. That's what I say. And again, that's what the Association for Research and Enlightenment has always been about. It's never been about accepting it on face value. Right. And even Hugh Lynn Cayce wrote about, the outer powers of his father's abilities. So nothing is so sacrosanct that it can't. There are no sacred cows, Jimmy. Not even Steve Vai's guitar is a sacred cow. And anything can be questioned and should be questioned. There should always be a pursuit of knowledge. It's good to be a skeptic. It's not so good to be a debunker, because like a debunker is a true believer that this never happened because it couldn't happen. So we don't want to be in those camps, but I would like to continue to pursue that. So now I know some people say ancient aliens get some things right, they get some things wrong. What I like about programs like that is that they pursue with curiosity what could possibly be. It doesn't mean it's scientifically dispositive, but when you look at the absolute scientific precision of what these edifices and these buildings and these great halls, how they were made, how they were put together, how they lined up with the stars, I think it's reasonable not to conclude, but to suggest or to opine or to remain curious that possibly there was an advanced civilization who created these edifices. Because today, I think we would be hard-pressed to recreate them with all the technology and computerization that we have. Could we have created the kind of blocks in a pyramid, which are several hundred tons a piece, where you can't even slide a credit card in between the two of them? Mm-hmm. I'm just saying, that's all. I'm just saying, apostrophe, that it's possible, and we should remain open to that possibility, and let's keep pursuing it.
Here's the crazy part. There are no architectural papyri. And you think about that for a second. These temples, right? Of course, the pyramids, everything that is built, Valley of the Kings, whatever it is, all the way across, up and down, east, west, north, and south in Egypt. And to suggest that, this is what makes it so incredible for me, to suggest that they just did it by spoken word, right? You're the engineer, you're Imhotep, right? You're Senefru, and you're walking around going, okay, so this is what we're going to do. You guys over here, flatten this. You guys over here, head to the quarry, make the stones about this big.
Yeah.
You're right. And then we're going to go and is that what you're suggesting? Because there's no way that's how it was done.
Well, Edgar Cayce suggested, again, take it for what you will. Mm-hmm. He was right about so many things. Maybe he wasn't right about this, but he did suggest that they used audio technology to lift those stones, that they had an ability to make steel swim as if it were liquid or something. If John Van Auken was here, he has the exact quote from the Cayce readings. But as if, imagine if steel were to become liquid-like. So there was some technology that Cayce suggested. Now, he never said, a bunch of green men came down or, and handed over. We reversed engineered one of their craft. And by the way, that's how we created the pyramids. Okay.
Right.
That Edgar never said. There was never the term flying saucer before Edgar came. All of the phenomena that really came right after his death. He dies in the very interesting linchpin year of 1945, because that's the year of Roswell. And then that's also the year that the Nag Hammadi library is discovered in the Middle East, which opens up all the Gnostic Gospels. And 2 years before, the Dead Sea Scrolls are found, which, by the way, Edgar Cayce predicted certain things that were in the Dead Sea Scrolls. He suggested were fact. They had never been accepted as fact. And then, oh, by the way, 2 years after his death, here are the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is the Torah, and the things that Edgar claimed before he had died were actually true. So, again, I'm not necessarily saying that you take anything or everything that Edgar said as gospel, but because he was right about so many things, it might be worthwhile to at least pursue that line of reasoning. So, yes, I hope they continue to look on the Giza Plateau, that they use 45-degree angles of using certain technologies. Again, whether it's the Japanese or the Italian teams, let's keep pursuing that. But again, all of this that we're talking about, all of the fantastical natures of UFO and UAP and everything about Atlantis. Let me quote Jim Vieira from the History Channel, who is here because we have Ancient Mysteries here every year. It's one of our best and biggest and most attended conferences. And Jim said, all of this psi phenomena, all of this fantastical ancient civilization, UFO, UAP, is just a gateway drug for our own spiritual evolution. And see, that's what Edgar
He's
was
not
about.
wrong, is he? Yeah,
I don't think so. I think that's the essence of it. Ultimately, does it raise our awareness of who we truly are, that we're connected with one another, that our essential nature is love, and that we're here to serve one another? Sounds simple, but maybe that's the Rosetta Stone.
Chris Naughton is our guest. I am your host, Jimmy Church. We're going to take a quick break. Chris, you stay right there. This is Fade to Black. We'll be right back after this short message. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get your alerts and access to over 2,000 videos. Click that subscribe button right now. Go to jimmychurchradio.com and get the Fade to Black official podcast. 2,000 episodes, all of them commercial free for just $2 a month. I am hosting, speaking, and presenting once again for the Conscious Life Expo, the largest conference of its type in the world. February 20th through the 23rd, 2026 at the LAX Hilton. Speakers, event, and schedule easy. Just visit consciouslifeexpo.com. I will be hosting and speaking at the Sedona Ascension Retreat, March 20th through the 22nd, 2026 in Sedona, Arizona. An amazing list of speakers, and it's beautiful Sedona. Come and hang out with us and just go to SedonaAscensionRetreats.com. I'm heading back to the Midwest for the Contact Modalities Expo, May 1st through the 3rd, 2026, in Delavan, Wisconsin, at the Lake Resort. It is beautiful. This is a great conference right in the heart of the Midwest, where I'm from. I'll see you there. Just go to Contact Modalities Expo, that's XPO.com. will be hosting, presenting once again at Contact in the Desert. That's May 28th through June 1st, 2026, the largest UFO conference in the world. Come and hang out with us June 23rd through July 1st. Tickets and everything else that you need is at contactinthedesert.com. Want to change your life? Want that paradigm shift? Then visit Peru with Brian Forster and myself for the Inca Celebration of the Sun, June 23rd through July 1st, 2026. A full 10 days of visiting the country, all of the amazing sights, and of course, the celebration of the winter solstice. It's all simple to do. Go to hiddenincatours.com. Come join us for the Monty Python Scotland Tour, August 1st through the 9th, 2026. This is a once-in-a-lifetime event where you get to go to the castles from Monty Python and the Holy Grail. August 1st through the 9th, 2026. Just visit HaleyARamsey.com. Watch Into the Vortex on Gaia TV. It's fade to black for the screen. Simple to do. Go to Gaia.com, search Jimmy Church, or click on the link below. Follow Fade to Black on Twitter at JChurchRadio. Get all of the show updates every single day. It's now called X, but who cares? Go to jimmychurchradio.com and become a Fadernaut. Get a membership. That's right. Everything's commercial. You have access to downloads, and you get to call yourself a Fadernaut.
Jimmy Church, Gaia TV, Fade to Black, here at Machu Picchu with Brian Forster and Hidden Inca Tours. Amazing tour so far, Brian, but we're here to announce what we're going to do next year in 2026. What's going on?
Okay, November 2026, we're going to have our major tour of Peru and Bolivia, either a pre or post tour of Paracas and Nazca on the coast. And then after that, 6 days in Easter Island.
Bucket list, Easter Island. Come join Brian and I and his amazing team here at Hidden Inca Tours for Peru, Bolivia, and Easter Island. Signing out. Say goodbye, Brian.
Bye, gang.
River Moon Coffee, makers of the Fade to Black blend. Truly the best coffee on planet Earth. Just visit rivermoonwellness.com or their Amazon store. It's all simple to do. You can check out the Fade to Black blend, the Game Changer blend, or any of their Black Moon Wellness products. It's the only coffee I drink. It is the best, and it's Doc. Again, rivermoonwellness.com. All right. Welcome back, Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Yeah. Fade to Black blend coffee. You know what to do. Just go to Amazon. Right there. My picture is right there. See? Right there. Fade to Black blend coffee. All right. Our guest tonight, Christopher Naughton, is here. We're discussing Edgar Cayce. And Christopher, check this out. This popped up in the chat. I love the chat here.
Yeah.
Very, very smart people. Somebody, I didn't know about this. Did Edgar Cayce do a reading for Nikola Tesla?
All right. So now you want to get my archivist, with the get some hives on her body. Here we go. Purportedly, Edgar Cayce gave readings to Woodrow Wilson, President, Thomas Edison, Tesla, George Gershwin, Amelia Earhart's husband, Mary Pickford, and many, many, many other people. Here's part of the problem. The problem is that those people who purportedly had readings from Edgar Cayce did not want those readings to go into the archives, as you can understand it. George Gershwin's are there, and for many years we would not divulge who was connected. These readings had numbers. And you can understand in their lifetime, and even for maybe a period like with copyright, a lifetime plus 75 years, at some point in time, you should be able to release those names. During his lifetime, George Gershwin probably didn't want to let you know that he had hemorrhoids, okay? But that's what he went to Edgar Cayce for.
Get out. Are you
seriously? That was part of his reading.
Man, I just learned that the whole show was worth it just on that nugget right there.
There you go, George Gershwin. Wow. You wondered how he created all that great music. Anyway,
couldn't sit right at the piano.
Yeah, well, that's what it takes. So whatever it takes, and he cured it, and he went on to do his best work after this. Only kidding, I don't know. But as far as Tesla and Edison go, there are indications that Tesla did get a reading, but we don't have the record on. We don't have the reading on record. Same thing with Thomas Edison. But here's the kinds of things, and I know that Sidney Kirkpatrick and Nancy Kirkpatrick and others have done a deep dive. So, for example, Thomas Edison, is there a reading in our archives for Thomas Edison? No. However, Thomas Edison and Edgar Cayce were in the same building in Menlo Park, New Jersey, on the same day in the 1920s. So I would submit to you, draw your own conclusions. These were people, don't forget, in that time period, we weren't that far removed from people at least being open to spiritualism, at least being open to that kind of channeling. When you think about a guy like Tesla, who said, basically our entire universe, if you think of it in terms of frequency and vibration, that's basically all you need to know. So these people were already kind of quasi-metaphysical. They may have had, now I don't know this about Tesla, and I really wish that I had either John Van Auken here or our archivist Jessica Newell here. They would tell you there's no dispositive 110% airtight notion that these people had readings from Edgar Cayce. However, Cayce and David Kahn, one of his associates, had ties into the government. Why wouldn't a Woodrow Wilson, for example, who was deathly ill, not reach out? Some people take extraordinary measures towards the end of their lives. They'll go to a faith healer. They've been doing chemo. It's not working. Why wouldn't a Woodrow Wilson maybe contact a man whose name and whose methods were captured as a headline in the New York Times? It's entirely plausible. So to honor my archivist, I cannot say definitively yes, that Tesla got a reading. Is it possible? Yes, it is possible. And in some cases, I would say, like in Edison, it is probable. And then in other cases, like George Gershwin and Amelia Earhart's husband, those are absolutely dispositive because those are in our archives.
What about aliens in contact and disclosure? What did he reveal about that? And think about that answer. Did he read all of his stuff? And have you? I can't imagine the volumes of documented things that were all put down from his, his readings and his stuff that he did while he was sleeping. How can anybody read all you? It would cover lifetimes, I would think.
Well, I know of at least two people who read every reading from front to cover, from front to back. And that would be Gladys Davis Turner, who was the scribe. She was one who was brought in to transcribe everything. Also, Stephen Schwartz. Have you ever heard of Stephen Schwartz, Jimmy?
Of course. Yeah, he's great.
One of the first remote viewers. I mean, one of the absolute pioneers in remote viewing. Stephen Schwartz is on, years ago as a young man, is on a little farm in Phoebus, Virginia. And two people drive up on the property who are driving in a Mercedes and have these elaborate clothes on. And he wondered how people even found this little place. And basically, long story short, a woman said, "Have you ever heard of Edgar Cayce?" to Stephen Schwartz. And he goes, "No, I haven't." She said, "You need to go to Virginia Beach," which was only about an hour away from Phoebus, Virginia, "and you need to study his readings." They left. He still couldn't figure out who these people were. Stephen Schwartz, being independently wealthy at that time, spent 5 years in the A.R.E. library reading every single 14,000 plus readings of Edgar Cayce's work as a young man. And whether there's a connection or not, and I think the argument could be made, Stephen Schwartz went on to become one of the greatest premier pioneers in the whole area of remote viewing. In fact, he doesn't even like to call Cayce psychic so much as the preeminent pioneer of remote viewing of his age.
What was he? Back to UFOs.
Yes. Yeah.
To comment on this stuff, I'm talking about Edgar, of course. He is entering into something, right? And so let's discuss UFOs now and aliens and ET and contact and what Edgar had to say about that. But he's going somewhere else. He's not here.
Right.
Let's circle back to that. UFOs, ET contact. What did Edgar have to say?
Well, Edgar said basically a number of things. And again, it's not like he's got, first off, the term flying saucer, as I mentioned before, didn't even come about until after he passes away. I think it's right around 43, 44. He passed away in 45. Of course, Roswell happens in 45. So
Roswell was 47.
Oh, was it?
Yeah,
bad, my bad. I don't know why I thought it was 45.
This is live radio, man. I
should have that in my notes here. No, 45. I thought it was 45. Isn't it interesting? Are you sure about that, Jimmy? I know you're sure.
Be very careful.
I know. Here,
your next words.
I'm gonna around or about 1945. So Roswell happens after he passes, and as I mentioned before, Nag Hammadi Library, the Gnostic Gospels are discovered, and also the Dead Sea Scrolls. This happens all within a couple of years of his passing. So we never had the term, flying saucer at that point in time. So, what we did have, however, was Cayce's readings where he would speak to people who had previous incarnations and soul experiences on other planets. He would also speak to people, for example, one reading was to a woman where he said the entity was among the priestesses of the Mayan experience. It was just before that period when those as from the East had come. And there were the beginnings of the unfoldments of the understanding that there were those that were visiting from other worlds or planets. There it is. I mean, It's a very clear, very clean reading, which talks about the fact that people visited from other worlds and other planets. Now, I don't know how much plainer you could be, but probably in the 1930s, they were probably saying, all right, we can't even mess with that right now. Let's talk about Jesus and his past lives, because that's already bringing us beyond the pale. So because it really wasn't in the zeitgeist, it wasn't in the consciousness of Americans at that time, or even in the world. Now, maybe if Cayce had lived another 5 years and had lived after Roswell, or had lived into 1952 when on two different occasions UFOs buzzed the Capitol in Washington, D.C., and people were freaking out. And then, of course, they said, nothing to see here, keep moving. Cayce may have said more about that, but Cayce made it very clear that man, here's another quote from another reading, man may become with the peoples of the universe, ruler of any of the various spheres through which the soul passes in its experience. So Cayce said, we as human beings are going to meet the people of the universe. Well, what does that mean? He wasn't going to talk about non-human intelligence. He wasn't going to talk about the Greys or the reptilians or, anything else that, we in the 21st century seem to bandy about nowadays, even at congressional hearings. But he did make it very clear, and this is why I keep going back to what I think is fundamental. Our soul is multidimensional, and it is multi-planetary. Because again, long before it became fashionable, I mean, people have been talking about the Pleiades out in the open for what, 30, 40, 50 years here in this country, since the New Age movement started to burgeon in the 1980s. But before that, you never heard the term Pleiades or the Pleiadians or the Arcturians, except in these very small esoteric corners. Well, Edgar Cayce talked about the fact that often when we passed from here, and again, think of ourselves as souls and not as simply a physical human body, but as a consciousness, we would move from one plane to another. So, for example, this is another reading. The common theory that incarnation into the earth plane is the only source of incarnation or appearance is erroneous. All right. So that's a basis. Let's start there. If any of us think that the only thing we are made up is flesh and blood, and this is our entire consciousness, and when our brain goes, we go, whatever we is, okay, this is where Cayce's coming out and saying, if you think your only incarnation is the earth plane, you got another thing coming. As an entity passes on from this present time or this solar system, this sun, these forces, it passes through various spheres, leading first into the central forces known as Arcturus, near the Pleiades. Eventually, an entity passes into the inner forces, inner sense, that they may again, after a period, maybe of 1,000 years, enter into the earth to make manifest those forces gained in its passage. So, once again, do we have the term flying saucer? No. Do we have the term UFO? No. Do we hear about aliens? No. But what you do get is information that lays the groundwork for the Western mind to start thinking, wait, this great scion of psychic awareness, of great mystical wisdom, is telling me that I'm not relegated to one lifetime in a physical body on one planet. He's talking about interdimensional and interplanetary sojourns as part of the soul's experience, as part of the soul's evolution. And sometimes we can't wrap our mind around billions of experiences over many lifetimes, but Cayce's basically saying to us, get used to it. You're here for a long time as we measure time, and there are innumerable experiences as a consciousness, as an entity, as we move up the ladder of spiritual evolution. And we're going to talk about these things actually next week, January 14th. We have Richard Dolan and we have Jeffrey Mishlove and Emmy Vadnais from New Thinking Aloud. Again, I'm guest host on New Thinking Aloud as well. And they're going to come and join us along with the great John Van Auken at A.R.E. And we will discuss the Age of Disclosure and basically review the documentary. It is free to the public. So if you're out there, whether you live in Virginia Beach or Montana or Japan or Texas or wherever, go to our website, Edgar Cayce, that's C-A-Y-C-E, edgarcayce.org, and sign up and register. Again, it costs you nothing. Not all of our conferences and events are free, but this one is. And we also, invite people to become members because there are so many benefits and privileges you experience coming to A.R.E., including some of our tours, coming to our conferences for free or for less than the general public. There's a lot of things. Again, I want to dispel the notion that somehow the A.R.E. is a Cayce museum. Now, we are going to be building a state-of-the-art museum exhibit hall there to honor Edgar Cayce's life, but make no mistake, the A.R.E. is on the cutting edge of consciousness studies, of mystical awareness, of metaphysical inner journeys. And we do that in many different ways here at A.R.E., but it is a font where people can come together, share stories, share ideas, and again, to let their inner journey, their soul journey, burgeon, explode, expand to a point where, you're taking that next step in your journey.
I like that reference, people of the universe. Wow. Such a visionary statement to look at that, life in the universe. That's it. Just people of the universe. Pretty powerful. We have the links up, everybody, in the chat for not only the events that Christopher is referring to, but everything else is right there. So we've got that up in the chat. I think that it's something that is basic to say, but if ET is getting here, and they are for sure, then they would have a grip on consciousness. And we have not, to say over and over again, we haven't evolved as a species to be at that level. No, we haven't. We absolutely have not. We oh man, here, the people of Earth, we're not people of Earth. We're people that are on the other sides of countries' borders and fighting about religion and politics and economy and still firing bullets at each other. We're not the people of Earth. but we perceive life out there. If ET is coming from a specific planet, I'll name Planet McDonald's. Well, then that's the way. We don't look at them as being divided. They have overcome all of that.
Well, maybe perhaps I would say this though, Jimmy, as backwards as we may be as a people, because we still engage in war and it can get pretty bloody and messy, and we're still greedy, and there are land grabs and religious wars and all that. But there must be something so precious about our ability to love and the emotion of love that I think, and again, this is maybe from some of the channeled readings I have read elsewhere. Some of it's from Cayce, some of it's from, a Bashar, but there are many sources that talk about there must be something very unique about being a human being on this planet, the consciousness or the consciousness potential that we have and our ability to love. And if, some of the stories we've heard from Strieber and others throughout the years is that, one of the reasons that maybe some of these civilizations are here, whether they're here to harvest some things, whether they're here to create hybrids, whatever it might be, there must be something so unique and precious about human beings that in some ways it is the envy of other civilizations in the universe. I may be just talking off the top of my head, but I bet you there are a lot of people out there who believe the same thing.
Well, there's so much fear put into this too, as well. Like the documentary that you guys are going to talk about, Age of Disclosure.
Yep.
That presents fear as the centerpiece of ET contact and disclosure.
Yeah. National security. Man,
if I hear that one more time,
yeah.
And that's the thing. I don't like that play on it. Is it to catch people's attention? I don't know. Last week, I want to mention this really quick. 2 weeks ago, I live in Palmdale. I live in the desert outside of Los Angeles right now. But so I go to Los Angeles a couple of weeks ago to go to dinner and with some friends at a restaurant in LA. And I needed tip money. I left the house without cash. And I never carry cash. But anyway, I like to, valet, wait to bartend, it's Christmas. I'm Santa Claus handing out $20 bills.
Yeah.
So I go, okay, there's a liquor store right there. I see the ATM sign. Let's go in there and I'll get some cash. We pull into the parking lot. Christopher, I swear to you, the stuff that was going on in that parking lot and in front of the liquor store, the crate, it was insane. I'm not going to get into specifics, but it was no man's land. And I'm going to the ATM, this joint, right? And I go in there and I get the cash and I get out. I get back in my car with my friend and we're driving. And I felt like I got away with my life. And I'm thinking, this is society. This right here, this represents us. Oh man, I don't know how we can grow up and get past this. I don't want ET to see the parking lot of that liquor store. You know what I mean? Because that's not us.
No, he's more interested in our nuclear sites, quite frankly. But again, that is a small slice. It's still.
I mean, we're not ready. We're not ready for ET if that stuff is still going down.
Well, hear me out here.
Okay.
It depends on where the critical mass is in consciousness. I would agree with part of what your statement is saying, and I think Dolan and Mishlev will say the same thing when they're here next week. It's not so much why aren't the ETs, landing on the White House lawn? Why aren't they coming to visit us? When are we going to reach a level of consciousness that will invite them in? When will we reach such a point that we reach a critical mass of consciousness where those from other civilizations say, okay, now they're ready? I don't think it's up to them so much because let's face it, if they buzzed the White House and they turned off some of our technology that could launch a nuclear code, then we know that they certainly have the technology to do a lot more damage than we've done even to ourselves. So there must be a certain level of consciousness that we have to reach. But again, a rising tide does lift all boats. Do you remember, Jimmy? I bet you remember, because we're again of the same age group, more or less, from the 20th century, where various groups went into cities and did like massive meditation.
Oh yeah.
And they were able to demonstrate that when enough people meditated in a city, that crime went down.
Yep.
That certain incidents, again, it no one went up and tapped someone on the shoulder and said, "Hey, dude, you should be nicer to your fellow man." It had nothing to do with that. It was literally raising the consciousness of the collective. Now, yeah, there are things we can do on a day-to-day basis to talk to people who are different from us politically, socially, culturally, religiously, all well and good. But it's still raising our own consciousness and the consciousness of the collective. That's the only way out. I mean, again, this is what I write about in America's Next Great Awakening. It's not about religious conversions. It's not about a big tent revival. It's about lifting our collective consciousness, seeing our commonality in one another, that we're here for one reason, to lift each other up and to serve one another. And I know it starts sounding like, old time preacher, but I mean, this is exactly what Edgar Cayce was talking about. He talked about psychic phenomena. He talked about civilizations. He talked about reincarnation. But when people wanted to learn how to, get into some of this psychic stuff, he basically would tell them, you need to meditate so much, every day. You need to serve your fellow man every day. All of the trinkets and all of the wonders of psychic phenomena and psychic talents are not bestowed upon you until you reach a certain level of consciousness. It always comes back to that. How much do we love? How much do we serve one another? How much do we forgive one another? And I believe that even as bad as that scene was out in the desert, that's just one snippet of humanity. And if other people were to raise around them, it would happen. It would seem by osmosis, but it would impact them as well.
Kim just posted, I popped it up here for everybody. She says, what does it mean to, quote, raise the consciousness? That is a great, honest question right there.
Yeah, it is. It is to raise our awareness to who we truly are, that we are not, again, I'll use a phrase you've heard before. We're not physical, we're physical beings, not physical beings having a spiritual experience. We are innately spiritual, meaning that this is much more of an illusion. This corporeal visage that you're looking at right now is much more of an illusion than the light of who we are. And because there's one undifferentiated source of consciousness, it means that you and I are much more intimately connected than we can possibly imagine. What's the old Maya Angelou line? It's not that you're your brother or sister's keeper. You are your brother. You are your sister. Christ said it. John Lennon said it. I am he is your me, and we are all together. I mean, I am the walrus, right? But in some ways, he was paraphrasing exactly what Jesus said. And that's so, and again, I understand how different it is. Jimmy's in a different body. He's got a bitchin' guitar there. I do not. I'm in a separate reality of my own. But at the same time, we are so intimately connected that on some level we are one. That is raising the notion. And again, if you were to have a near-death experience and go into a life review, as so many thousands and thousands of people have, they go through these events in their lives where they've impacted other people, even being mean to other people. And what they realize is they had been perpetrating that hatred upon themselves, because in that life review, they're not only feeling the feelings of what they exhibited, they're also feeling exactly the emotions that the other person exhibited. To raise our consciousness is to realize that innately we are connected. We are here with separate personalities, but ultimately we're from one undifferentiated consciousness.
Where did I'm going to circle back? Where did Edgar go?
You mean where did he go from when he left here? I mean, what was his experience next, or what have you?
Well, to access and to go through this stuff.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay,
where was he going to?
gotcha. Yeah,
Let me
I gotcha.
let me say this.
Yeah.
DMT.
Yeah.
Not mushrooms, not LSD. No. Those are drugs. Okay, those are
Okay.
drugs. On drugs, I haven't done it in 40 years, but DMT is different. DMT is a key. It's a tool.
Yep.
And you truly, honestly visit someplace else that is real. And so back to my question, where
did he go?
Was he accessing another dimension, another reality?
Yes. I'm going to give you two examples. Let me give you one story, which I think is so emblematic of the remote viewing ability, the consciousness accessing ability of Edgar Cayce. So Edgar Cayce is giving a reading for somebody who needs some sort of medicine to get better. He said, you need to find oil of smoke and you need to ingest so much of that. So they didn't know where to find it. So they go back and they get a reading and they said, oil of smoke, where can we get it? And he tells them the pharmacy of where these people can go. People go out, they go to the pharmacy, they ask the pharmacy for oil of smoke. The pharmacist has never heard of it. What are you talking about? I have no idea. They go back to Cayce again in reading. We went to the pharmacy. They could not find oil of smoke. Edgar says, if you go down the fourth aisle to the fifth shelf at the top, all the way in the back, you will find oil of smoke.
Really?
And sure as hell, that's exactly what happens. So yeah, exactly. Where did he go to? What did he access? Once again, who are we? It's non-local consciousness, meaning we are not relegated. We are not tied ultimately to our cranium and whatever pulp is in between our temples here, that we are far more expansive, more interdimensional, more interplanetary. And so, yes, they found that and they gave that to the person. Now, where Cayce actually went to, he, as opposed to spiritualist of the day or before his time, who channeled other beings, some alive, some dead, some ascended masters, Cayce rarely, if ever, did that. 99.9% of the time, he was accessing what he called his higher self. And the higher self could access the Akashic records, which again is this great virtual library where all the events of all space and time are there, are listed. You wonder sometimes when he talks about the Akashic records and still says things such as, but you still have free choice. You go, wow, how does that work? Sometimes my human mind doesn't wrap around that. He gave a lot of, great prophetic predictions. The First World War, the Second World War, the Great Depression, predicted all of that. And yet he maintained that no prophecy was set in stone. In fact, often prophecies were given so that humanity would purposefully change those prophecies, especially, of course, those baleful prophecies. We are sitting here today where Edgar Cayce basically was talking about a lot of land being underwater. Now, we didn't have global warming or climate change when Edgar was on the planet, but you can almost see now what his consciousness was seeing. And again, it's not set in stone. We still have freedom of choice, but it's kind of like concrete setting where it starts to galvanize and get strong. I mean, you can change concrete around for a little while because it's malleable. At some point in time, you've reached a point of no return. So where did Cayce go? He was outside his body. I mean, he would give a reading for somebody in New York. He'd go into a trance. He'd give a reading for someone in New York and say, oh, what a beautiful day it is. You can smell the daffodils and the tulips in the air. It's a wonderfully warm day here. And of course, it was a wonderfully warm day in New York where the subject was requesting a reading. So somehow, some way, Edgar's consciousness got outside of time and space, got outside of his body, was able to go to places and was able to read various records and read various lifetimes of other people. There was one time Edgar was arrested in Detroit. He was arrested twice in his life for practicing medicine without a license.
Right.
And one time when he was in Detroit, he was thrown in a cell with a bunch of, hooligans, if you will. He and his son, Hugh Lynn, must have been pretty daunting. But what Edgar started doing, because he could start doing some of this stuff even in a waking state as he got older, he started telling people why they were there in prison. And one guy, and he had no way of knowing this, except he basically told him the way you're treating your wife, because the guy was in there for domestic violence, is what is holding you here, what is holding you back. So, not unlike, Pee Wee Herman in one of his movies, all of a sudden the guys who wanted to kill him and bash him were his buddies, were his friends. And these people were actually helped by Edgar, giving them insight as to why they were in the predicament they were in.
Wow, that's fascinating. That's fascinating. I've done, I don't need to spend any time on this. Our time is too valuable. I've done DMT 3 times.
Mm-hmm.
And so now for the audience, they're going, what? I thought it was only twice. Yes, it was twice last month, but this month it is now, the number is 3.
Mm-hmm.
To quote Monty Python, the number shall be 3. It's at 3 right now. But let me say this.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't, although I could have, I haven't asked questions while doing it, but I have experienced and interfaced with a guide who walked behind me. She was female. She was female. Is that correct? It was female. She was female. It was female. Anyway, I never asked her, but I could have. It was a truly physical, amazing experience to go through. And she was talking with me, and I said a couple of things. I didn't ask exploratory questions. Maybe I will in the future. But the point is, it happened. It
Mm-hmm.
was as real as you and I, as real as this can be. Right?
Yeah.
And that went down. And so when we talk about Edgar Cayce and his ability to do this, and through my own experience, there's no reason to question any of this. He did what I just said. He took it a step further. He explored.
Yeah. And I mean, and this is, again, the things that we do at A.R.E. every day, meaning how does one sharpen one's intuition? How does one sharpen one's psychic abilities? How does one, create and work in communities where one meditates or learns, other techniques that brings them closer to their soul's purpose? I mean, look, if any of us on this planet right now looking at UFO, UAP, or anything in the psychic continuum don't realize that ultimately this is a spiritual trip, it's a interdimensional, interplanetary trip, we're probably missing the forest for the trees. And again, this is why we keep coming back to it. Not like old time religion, like you got to do A, B, and C, or you're going to hell, or, God's going to look down upon you. If anything, as Cayce said many years ago, when people questioned him, he said, if you don't agree with this, have nothing to do with it. So those people over the years, and again, some of my Christian friends would call it a cult and that sort of thing, because it frightens religion. It challenges religion. It tells you your fundamental reading of one holy book is not the be all and end all. And again, Edgar Cayce, again, I've said it earlier in the interview, was a Christian. He was a mystic. Here's a guy who read the Bible through once every year, front to back. And I'm talking, I'm talking books like Habakkuk and Chronicles. I mean, all the way to Revelation. And he didn't read the Bible the first 11 years of his life, and he didn't own one, but he made up for that. So by the time he died at 67, he had read it through Old Testament to New Testament each time. Tell me how many Christians that we know have read the Bible back and forth. But for Cayce, this was his portal. This was his touchstone. And that's why I think sometimes when you look at the Edgar Cayce readings, they have more of that 20th century, somewhat biblical overtones, because we have to remember when this information was coming forward. And for people who wanted to step out on the limbs a little bit and move out a little bit past the orthodoxies that they had been introduced to, you couldn't go so far ahead at that time because people would have rejected it outright. You almost had to take baby steps to stretch them from where they were in consciousness and what they had learned from their religions. That's why those readings about Pleiades and Arcturus didn't get a whole lot of play, because it was beyond the pale. It was already too much to be talking about reincarnation. Let's leave it there, is what they would say. But now today's, with 100 years of hindsight, because 100 years ago this year, actually it was 1925, so it was 100 years ago last year now, that Edgar Cayce moved from Dayton, Ohio to Virginia Beach, Virginia. And again, as I said before, that's when the world of Atlantis and Egypt and near-death experiences and psychic phenomena really took off.
That is fascinating to me. What about, okay, did he comment about Akhenaten?
Yeah, I do not know, and I do not believe he did. I really don't believe he did.
Let me say this, because we're talking about gods here and we're talking about religion.
Mm-hmm.
And Akhenaten his god, the Aten, okay, so remember, it was polytheism before Akhenaten.
Right.
He comes in, he says, no, out with all of that stuff, which actually made life simple, having a lot of gods, because nobody fought. When you have one god, you're either right or wrong, right? So that causes problems.
I don't know.
Right. But my point being this.
Uh-huh.
So he comes along, and he wasn't the first to, or the only, I should say, to do this, but the Aten wasn't in man's image. The Aten were the solar rays, not the sun. Not the energy. That was the god, and that was the religion. Mm-hmm. And Akhenaten, and the reason why I'm bringing this up with Edgar, and well, I'm going to have your archivist look into this.
Yeah, I don't believe so, because I've never heard it, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Let me explain the reason why I'm bringing it up.
Mm-hmm.
Akhenaten, who is Amenhotep the fourth, his dad was Amenhotep the third, but Akhenaten was never referenced as his child. He doesn't appear in any of the hieroglyphs, in any of the writings, but suddenly he becomes Pharaoh, and he changes his name. No pharaohs do that, but he did. He changed his name from Amenhotep the fourth to Akhenaten. All right. And then he disappears. There's no record of his birth. There's no reference to him. There's no reference to his death. But he shows up with his elongated skull, and the Aten, the solar energy, was the religion. That says it smells, it tastes, it feels of ET, of some type of NHI. I don't know, but the historical record not having him there. And so having somebody like Edgar to comment on this and look into it, I think would be very enlightening.
It would be. And in some ways, it's interesting. We talk about man being made in the image of God, but that's because with our human mind, we think of ourselves like, well, we're flesh and blood, so therefore God must be flesh and blood, as opposed to inverting that and saying, this is a solar, non-physical energy. We're made in that image. Maybe we are solar, non-physical entity. We buy too much into what our eyes and our five senses, can ascertain, as opposed to looking beyond that veil.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And when we look at and we try to unpack ancient history, and to be clear for everybody, I don't need to explain this to Christopher, of course, but to be clear, history is written. We have the record. That is history. Ancient history is before history. Okay? There's no right. So that's one of the fascinating parts about us that I'm most interested in is, the written stuff, right? Okay, but the prehistory and ancient history. But here's the thing. all of what we know now, and that goes with Sumer, Mesopotamia, the ancient world, Mayans, we barely have deciphered that. The Sumerian scripts barely have, only a few people can read it. The same thing with hieroglyphs and the ancient sacred writings of Egypt. All of that is modern knowledge within the last 100 to 200 years. This isn't something that's been passed down and we've studied and we've researched and we understand. No, and so this is modern stuff that scholars only knew about. And so for Edgar Cayce to come along and comment on this very accurately is fascinating to me, because nobody had that knowledge.
Oh, and again, could you imagine? He talked about the Essenes, and the Essenes were, up until Edgar's death, the Essenes were a small male cult of an esoteric Jewish sect, and that was that. And Cayce said, no.
Right.
The Essenes were a group of people, men and women, who lived in community and then purified themselves over hundreds of years to bring the Christ into the world. And people are like, come on, that's not even a thing. He dies in 45, 47, Dead Sea Scrolls. Oh, wait.
Exactly my point.
Here are the Essenes, and that's exactly what they did. And it's even interesting that modern day Christianity doesn't even see this small Jewish cult as the one that brought the Christ in, that they were called to do this. John the Baptist, his cousin, his mother Mary, all of these people were Essenes. And Edgar talked about Essenes and Essene energy, and talked about modern day Essenes bringing the Christ into the earth, that we are all the Christ in utero. In essence, I mean, this is exactly what got Ralph Waldo Emerson kicked out of Harvard back in the 1800s. He dared to, equate us with Jesus. But this is what Edgar Cayce talked about 75 years after Emerson, is that we're all Christ in utero. That is our destiny. And he talked about Virginia Beach having some sort of vibratory pattern that enhanced this. He talked about what they called the White Brotherhood. We call it the White Light Brotherhood, which were Essene beings, and their energy, according to Cayce, is somehow ensconced in this area. Now, what's interesting about this is that, again, I mentioned Pat Robertson and the Christian Broadcasting Network earlier, and how they built this behemoth empire on the other side of town. Pat Robertson even ran for president and actually won the South Carolina primary from George H.W. Bush back in the late 1980s. The man not only had a financial empire, he had a political and religious empire as well, which maybe tells you all you need to know. But the fact is that he came here, he said, to counterbalance the darkness on the other side of town, meaning Edgar Cayce, that somehow there was a vibratory pattern here. These are words that Robertson uses himself, sort of a vibration he called a satanic vibration, that brought in the necromancers, the psychics, the channelers, etc. So we live in a very interesting place here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. But I think part of our national destiny, our spiritual destiny, is playing out, because, again, how do you have the loudest and the largest Christian mouthpiece probably in the world, and the most noted psychic, both calling this place home at one point in time?
Tobacco. Yeah. What about, and I kid everybody, I'm not really, it's about the tobacco. What about Atlantis? I mean, what did he have to say about Atlantis, and how closely does it line up with Solon and Plato and the other comments and the Edfu Builder's text?
And once again, there was not much a mention of Plato mentioned Atlantis, Francis Bacon mentions Atlantis, a few others. Cayce goes full bore on Atlantis. Hey guys, by the way, before y'all were here and you had this modern, Western and Eastern society, there was a multitude of civilizations. There was also Lemuria. That's another topic for another time. But Atlantis seems to be the one that galvanizes and focuses our consciousness, because here was a society that was highly advanced, but their technology outstripped their consciousness, their spiritual awareness, and that they eventually, collapsed not once but twice. And it was after the second collapse that that various races went to various places on the planet, including the Mayans, the Mexican, the Yucatan Peninsula. He talked about Egypt, of course. Cayce said that there are 3 repositories of the Hall of Records. One would be, somewhere in the Bimini area in near the Bahamas. One would be in Mexico, and the other one would be in Egypt. And because they all came from Atlantis, those Hall of Records, if you will, would line up. And so Atlantis was a great, and according to Edgar Cayce, he was, the builder, as Rata, the designer of those pyramids. And again, bring John Van Auken on sometime, Jimmy, to really give you the right down to the foundation of all of the things that Cayce said about his lifetime in Egypt, how Atlantis led to Egypt's prowess, and how those pyramids were built, and how the Sphinx was built, when it was built. I mean, I know we've heard from Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval over the years that have, is it Sir Anthony
Robert Schock, John Anthony
Yes,
West.
exactly. Who have challenged the Egyptologists who said, no, it's no more than 3,000 years old. We'll see. I think as time goes on, I'm remaining curious. I think as time goes on, I think Cayce will be proven right once again. But yes, Atlantis is the great marker where they had a use of a crystal, which sounds like a laser on steroids, if you will, some sort of superconductor, and that it was used eventually, I think, to really basically to destroy, civilization as we knew it. So Atlantis goes under. Some people do survive. Many of them go to Egypt, and that's probably where the greatest, legacy is of the Atlantean civilization.
Yeah, I think it's worldwide. I think it's global. Certainly, Egypt is wonderful, but you venture into South America and Central America, and you look at some of the stuff. When you brought up earlier in the time that we have left, I do want to comment on this. You brought up earlier that Edgar said sound and vibration is what they used for the technology to build the stuff.
Yes.
When you go to Egypt, okay, yes, it's there, no doubt. The Asarian, you go there and it's like, somebody explain this to me like I'm 2, because none of this makes any sense. But you go to Ollantaytambo, or you go to Sacsayhuaman in Peru, where the stones are redunculous. Okay, I'm talking 2, 3, 4 stories tall,
Right.
going into the ground, the fit and everything else. So
Jimmy, a mule carried those. I just want to let you know, just one mule.
We just rolled them in, So anyway, you look at that, and the idea of rolling this on logs with I don't know how many men and ropes. No, it didn't happen that way. But here's the thing. I am with you on the liquid part. There's something there that says to me, when you look, especially at Sacsayhuaman, that maybe there was some industrial heating going on, that the stones were placed there and levitated in, and then they heated them up and they shrunk and fit into each other like biscuits in a pan in the oven, right? Where they fold and monkey bread, kind of thing. But because it's too perfect. I don't have the answers. But
and not only that, but lining up with the belt of Orion on top of that. And not only that, but being mathematically perfect. These things are mathematically perfect. And again, I would be the first to acknowledge that, I'm hardly an aficionado with all of the elements that went into building the pyramid, or what we suspected it, and its mathematical perfection. But again, I remain curious as to how these modern miracles could probably not even be created by us today, not to the mathematical precision that they were created purportedly 3,000 years ago. And if Edgar Cayce was right, more like 10 or 12,000 years ago.
Yeah, when you walk among, especially geese is a really good example of this, because if we go with the historical Orthodox view that all of this happened around 2650 BC, right? Okay, so 4,500 years ago or so. And you fixate on that and you accept that number. All right, that's fine. But when you walk through there and you're looking, it's old. It's old. It's old. There are parts of the Giza Plateau. I swear, I don't want people to please save your email or whatever. It looks like it's 1,000,000 years old. I can't explain it. It is, you're looking at these sharp stones built, 5,000 years ago, and you can see, then you look right next to it, rounded, old, weathered temples that don't fit the rest of what you're observing. So I don't have the answers, but it ain't what we're being told.
Well, of course not. Again, fundamentalism says, here's the answer. Shut up. Don't believe your lying eyes, ears, heart, mind, or intuition. This is the answer. Let's move on. And that's, what we've always been told. The whole notion is, once again, you've heard me say, remain curious. Remain curious because we are finding out more about our past. And again, if there is that opportunity to know what our history is, if that somehow is imported and we are allowed to see it, I think it's going to open up dimensions. It already is opening up dimensions. One of the things I hear about the age of disclosure is that, and I've heard from people like Daniel Sheehan, and I know you've certainly met and worked with Danny before, where they say things like, well, we've heard from very venerated, grounded, former military people that there are many different types of alien races right here, that some have always been here. In fact, some may be here after we go, that there is a multiplicity of various civilizations who come and go, who warp time. I mean, well, one of the things I loved about Age of Disclosure, and again, I didn't like all of it because there's so much accentuation on fear and national security, but the whole notion that these vehicles basically travel in a time-space warp or bubble seems to make a whole lot more sense to me, because, we think, well, some civilization couldn't come from, 5 million miles away. Not if they're traveling in a Corvette or in a Netzel or in a Vega. Sure, I get that. But, maybe Star Trek had it right. Maybe there is such a thing as a time-space warp. Why not? So, I think this is the most exciting time to be alive. And we at A.R.E. are right in the middle of this consciousness revolution. And again, we go back to the gold standard, Edgar Cayce, who introduced our Western world to so many great psychic mysteries, and that it deserves to be plumbed further. And we together as a community continue to raise our awareness and raise our consciousness.
What a great conversation tonight. I need to come out to A.R.E.
Please.
I need to come out to A.R.E.
All of you folks.
I need to
We're
come
right
out there.
here at the ocean. We have a wonderful spa that uses Cayce modalities for various types of massage. We've got a restaurant here, which is all holistic food. We have our conferences here. We have Conscious Universe, which we've just started. We have our Wednesday night webinar.
Is the restaurant vegan, or is everything on the menu?
It's everything. It's omnivore, but if you want a good vegan, gluten-free meal, you got it. But if you want,
not interested. Not interested. I don't even know what gluten is. Damn it.
Well,
I think it's bad. See, that's part of the national security state fear stuff. Is what gluten is.
I don't know, but I would say this: if you want your bacon with your eggs, we can help you out.
That's what I'm talking about.
All right,
Christopher, great conversation tonight. We have links for everything that Christopher is doing in A.R.E. They're here over on our website and throughout social media. Christopher, I got to come out to A.R.E., but also I'm going to have Michelle reach out to you and get you back on the show as soon as we can, because I want to continue this conversation.
Lots. And again, bring John Van Auken on, because if you really want to get really drill down to some really amazing Cayce stories, I know maybe 500, he knows 50,000. So you really want to talk to John as well.
Hit up Michelle and get that set up. Okay. Would you do me that favor?
We will do that, Jimmy. Love your work, and I'd love to see you out there in the desert. Love that the whole Palm Desert area. We're hoping to be out there next May at Contact in the Desert. So hopefully we'll get a chance to I'll be able to see that Steve Vai wish he had made the guitar that you made. I'd love to see that in person.
I can't wait to see you again, my friend. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care. Be well.
Enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Will. Bye now. Good night.
Christopher Naughton, A.R.E. Incredible conversation tonight. And yes, we need to continue this conversation, and we will do that. With that, I need to sign off. I've got a busy week in front of me, but I will see everybody right back here next Monday. We've got a full week of shows next week. I've got to go and live my other life and be a TV show host for the next few days. So I'm going to go do that. Everybody enjoy the rest of your evening. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black. But for now, you know what I've got, and that's Go Beckley Tap. Fade to Black is produced by Hilton J. Palm, Renee Newman, and Michelle Freed. Special thanks to Bill, John, Dex, Jessica, Dennis, and Kevin. Webmaster is Drew the Geek. Music by Doug Aldrich. Intro, Space Boy. Fade to Black is produced by KJCR for the Game Changer Network. This broadcast is owned and copyrighted 2024 by Fade to Black and the Game Changer Network, Inc. It cannot be rebroadcast, downloaded, copied, or used anywhere in the known universe without written permission from Fade to Black or the Game Changer Network. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Go Beckley Tappy.